Hey, Sam, Relove Guitars, welcome to the workshop. And I'm boiled, and it's November. Well, it's nearly December. It's a day away from December, or something like that. And so, today we are on the case with this Squier Standard Series Stratocaster, picked up in London this week via Gumtree. And I've just had to take my sweater off because I'm absolutely boiling. You wouldn't believe this is December in the UK, but it is. Okay, so quick look. Everything we'd expect from a Squier Standard. Really nice quality maple neck. Very straightforward, nothing fancy. Medium frets. 3 single coil pickups. The 2-point floating tremolo bridge. With the nicely kind of milled blocks, or bridge saddles I should say. We've got a sort of slightly parchmenty coloured pick guard, and the bog standard controls, 5-way switch, volume 2 tones, sparkly, slightly sparkly metallic black finish, and full weight body. And we've got actually, this is interesting. Not the usual standard. Not the standard. Am I imagining things? I think it's not the standard. Not the regular standard plate on the back. If I'm not mistaken, they normally come with the slots to adjust the tremolo. I mean, it's no big deal, but it just caught my eye. But it's gotten inspected by Mr. Tigor. It's expected. Wow, August 2000. I think it's 2008. Yeah, August 2008. So not an old guitar by any means. And I'm pretty sure that the guy I bought it off had it from new, and he was a nice little old chap living in Hampstead Heath, on the edge of Hampstead Heath in London, in a very big, expensive house with his wife. And he'd bought himself a couple of guitars a few years ago. With the intention of, he said, becoming Neil Diamond, and then his wife told him to forget it shortly afterwards. So he basically parked these things up and didn't play them. So he had both for sale. So on this standard we've got fairly nice quality tuners, absolutely dependable, never had any problem with those. We've got the 70s style large headstock, and the serial number on the back is an IC Indonesia serial number, and from my research, or what I learned about its serial numbers on these Squiers yesterday, that tells me that it's made in the Court factory as opposed to the Samick factory, and it's 08 as confirmed by the little sticker on the back. So it's 2008 guitar, made in Indonesia at the Court factory, which is the Court and the Samick factory are renowned to be a cut above some of the other factories, and I don't know what the names of the other ones are, but anyway, so absolutely pristine really. A couple of little scuffs that need polishing just from where he's sort of moved it around the house by the looks of it, but no scratches, no dents or dings, and it will set up and polish up nicely. So let's get straight into it. I'm just going to think where to put you today. I'm going to start with you sitting here. And this weather in the UK is just bizarre, because I've got the door open because it's nice and fresh, and I've got the heater on a little bit in here just to take the chill off the place, but it isn't cold, so it's kind of a strange mixture. Okay, so we've got an action here of nearly 3mm at the 21st fret, and I know for a fact we'll get way better than that and make it much more playable. Okay, so just out of interest, what I'd also like to know before I do anything else, and sometimes I write this down, but sometimes I don't. If it's really critical, I write it down. But it's just for interest, because I know where I'm going to go with the setup of this. I'm going to aim for a fairly standard setting on guitars like this. And I will predict that the action here is probably about 0.6 or 0.7. So I'm going to dial 0.75 on my feeler gauge just to begin with, and I'm just going to push that under there and see if that, yeah, It's more than point. So the fact that it rings a note while the gauge is still under there tells me that's about a 0.8 gap. And actually we want about 0.25 or 0.3. So it's kind of at least twice, heading into the region of nearly 3 times too high, which is going to make all the difference to the playability of this guitar. I mean, it's, you know, I have to say it's playable now. But if you want a guitar that plays really effortlessly, you need to get that right. Okay, so let's say goodbye to Mr. Allen's strings that have been there since 2008, possibly, when he bought it. Actually, it doesn't look that old. The strings certainly don't look that old. They're not 6 years old. But, I wouldn't think this guitar's had too many owners, though. It's too well kept for that. And judging by the gentleman's age, it wouldn't surprise me if he had bought it in 2008 and left it, messed around with it for a year, and then kind of given up and left it for the rest of the time. in a nice house, nice and sort of dry environment, so no surprise then. So off we come with the old strings. Goodbye. And straight into the bin with all the bits. So if you're a newcomer to all of these videos, and I wouldn't blame you if you were, because they're kind of, the purpose behind all these videos is not really as an entertainment channel. I make them primarily to help sell guitars like this that you're looking at. But if you have watched some of the other ones, then you will know or recognise some of the process that I go through with these. But let's just assume for a moment that you're not. And I'm going to turn this off so you can not get interference. I forget that every single time. So I'm going to have a little pot to put various bits and pieces in as I take them off. So I'm just going to take off this back panel. Yeah, so going back to what I was saying, if you, hang on a minute, I've lost something. There it is. No, it's going to be in here. Yeah, if you haven't seen any of these videos before, what I do is buy really good quality second-hand, or really good quality budget guitars, usually second-hand, and do the work to set them up so that they play better than they did when they were new. Only two springs, eh? Okay, which I've discovered, by the way, isn't hard to do, providing you know the basic things you're doing. But it's not too hard to do, because kind of in my favour, I suppose, which is the fact that all manufacturers, just about all, I haven't really seen many exceptions, so just about all manufacturers push their guitars out of the factory without setting them up properly, with the result that I can pretty much guarantee that about 95%, if not more, of the guitars that I buy second hand have never been set up properly. Not that they've been bought and messed around or turned into guitars that are hard to play, that they've been more or less hard to play from the outset. And the more I do this, the more I see that's the case. So in my favour, the manufacturers don't set them up well, or to my advantage, I should say. And also, quite surprisingly, as I've discovered more and more over time, nor do the shops, the retailers, either online or in the high street. Okay, so the result is a whole world full of budget guitars, which everybody thinks are fairly shit. Sorry for my foul language. And a kind of all seems to support a myth that in order to get a guitar that's really good to play, you've got to go and spend £1,000 or $2,000 or whatever, and buy a Gibson or a really expensive custom shop Fender or something like that. And I guess the whole system is set up that way. I hate these little plastic stickers, by the way. They all come off. Don't care if there's some sort of European legislation that says you've got to have them on them. Yeah, so everybody, the whole kind of status quo, let's use a rock terminology, but the status quo, I guess, is that everybody believes that, you know, budget guitars are more or less crap, and that to have a guitar that's really good to play, you've got to spend proper money, and so the world goes round based on that understanding. And so there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of budget guitars abandoned. People get fed up with them. Newcomers try and play. Even a basic out-of-the-box thing like this can be so hard to play that the learner just can give up on it very quickly. Possibly like Mr. Allen that I bought this off. So I got into this having learned that this doesn't have to be the case, and I had way back I discovered, I suppose you could say, the secret that any of these budget guitars actually contains all the basic components you need for a great playing guitar. Occasionally there are some with such cheap nasty pickups that they're just unplayable, or some that just have a combination of things that make them pretty horrible. But I would say the vast majority of all the £100, £200 budget guitars that you get out there that you've probably bought, hated, sold on and upgraded, all of those can be made to play brilliantly, so much so that if you had one, you'd want to keep it, not sell it on. So luckily for me, there's this world full of people getting rid of perfectly good guitars, which once I've set them up, just using a few basic principles, can be beautifully playable guitars. And in fact, what I'm finding is, for example, this guitar here, the standard series Squier, which doesn't rate really highly on any Muso's chart. If you kind of look out there in the world of musicians, forums and so on, you know, this is rubbish. This is a piece of crap compared to, you know, a £300, I don't know, vintage reissue, what do they call it? Vintage modified Strat or a classic Vibe, which are you know, much better guitars to start with, but they're not so different. And the real difference is actually between most of those is the quality of the finish and the setup. So these aren't highly regarded, but what I'm finding is they are quite well regarded in the second-hand market if you set them up well. And they've got a really, these standard Squiers, believe it or not, sell quicker than any other guitar that I currently set up. So at the moment I've got 3 or 4 other guitars listing on eBay, and I know that if I put this one out on Monday, if I do it now, continue this, finish it, put it out and list it on Monday, this will be sold by the end of next week, because they're so there's a certain market looking for them. But most guitarists don't rate this very highly. So I know that this has got all the basic components to make a really, really cool and quality guitar, and that's what I'm here to do, which is to follow those things through. So that's what this video is going to be about, and it's pretty much the same as every other video that I make while I'm doing this. So there are, if you were crazy enough to watch any one after another, you'd hear me say exactly the same things. I don't apologise for that. This is aimed at you if you've come from eBay and you're thinking, I want to see what work is done on this guitar. I want to have faith or feel confident this is a good guitar. Coming from the point of view that you haven't watched any of my stuff before, which is probably healthy, what I'm going to do is whatever it takes to make this guitar play really well and into the quality guitar it should have been when it left the factory or the retailer. And as I mentioned previously, there are a sort of dependable number of things I need to do to make that happen, and you'll see me go through them in this video. What's true to say is that for me, the heart of getting this guitar to be everything it should be is taking care of this neck, because the neck is the place where you really interact with it. It's a place where if it's inaccurate, if the frets are a millimetre out of place this way, it won't play, it'll play like crap. If the neck is misplaced, the action will be horrible, or it won't be right for the length of the guitar, and the intonation will be wrong. If the frets are uneven, you won't be able to have a low action. You'll be stuck with a high action to overcome the unevenness of the frets and so on. If the nut's wrong, it'll be hard to play, and it'll be out of tune down here when you fret individual notes or open chords, and so on and so on. So this is the heart of the guitar, and it's also why I don't offer setups that don't include a full fret leveling, reprofiling and polishing, because I don't see there's any point just lifting up and down action when I can guarantee you from my experience working here now that every single guitar has uneven frets to begin with. We've not come across a single one in this workshop where the frets, in fact the complete unusual one in a million, I think was about 15-20% of the frets were uneven, and that was possibly because it had been through somebody else's hands like mine who'd done a fret leveling on it. But the average, according to my chart on the wall, on my cardboard chart over there, the average for any guitar coming through this door is about 60% uneven frets, and that means that every single budget second-hand new or second-hand guitar out there has 60% of the frets are uneven relative to each other, more or less extreme unevenness. And what that means in practice is that the action has to be set to accommodate that. So it has to be raised high enough to overcome the problems that you get with uneven frets. And that limits then how low it can be, and then that's how the guitar goes out into the world. That's how you come across it. You probably try and lower the action at the bridge, and then you find it starts buzzing and choking the notes, and then you go back up and leave it as low as you can go without having choking and buzzing notes. But that's the inherent kind of permanent limitation that you have, and that comes with the guitar. It's not like it's happened because somebody looked after it badly. It's not because some teenager left it in their bedroom and treated it wrong. That's how it came out of the factory, and that's how it came out of the shop, which is, to this day, still amazes me how that's the case, but it is the case. So the heart of turning this guitar into a great budget instrument is to take care of the neck first before we try and set up anything else. So setting up the neck means leveling all the frets, and you'll see me in a minute check for the levelness of frets, and you'll see we'll get a figure, and I predict it'll be about 65% uneven frets. That's my little prediction, just because I've seen a few of these. So then we'll level the frets. I'll re-profile them so they don't have a flat spot with lots of file marks on it. But I'll re-profile the frets so that they're nice and smooth like they should be, but they're all still at the exact same height, even leveled height. And then I will polish them all back up to a really smooth, shiny playing surface. Once I've done that, then I can now lower the action and make it more playable. And then I can also adjust the action down here at the nut to make it more playable here, and also better intoned. And then finally I'll end up checking the tremolo setting and the intonation of each individual string. And once we've done, then we'll give it a good clean up along the way, and that will be pretty much the basics of getting this guitar to play the way it should have done when it was made. Okay, so enough chatter. That's just by way of an introduction, really. Explain what you're going to see. So I'm going to stop and start and carry on with this job. And the first thing I'll do is take off the neck and separate the two parts so I can work on them. Okay, so we're back in, ready to do the neck. So first thing to do when you're doing the neck is to make sure that you've got the right drill bit for the job, and don't have it going the wrong way. And so just as you take the neck off, the main thing to watch out for, well, two things really, I suppose, is one is just feel, as you do it, get a sense of how tight those things are done up. Now, there probably is a torque setting in the Fender factory manual or whatever, I don't know what it is. But you can have a sort of sense that that wasn't massively tightly done up. I'm also set, you could test it if you've got a torque screwdriver. Try undoing it on 7. Right? I mean, it's not scientific, okay, but let's see if 7 undoes it. Yep, 7 undoes it. Try and undo one of them on 4. No. Try it on 5. No. Try it on 6. Yeah. Okay, now that's a little secret thing. You don't need to trawl over the internet. Let's leave this thing, let's leave it on 6, or at most 7, right? When we do it up now, right, we're going to put the same amount of torque into it as was there before. That's a little cheap trick. So no Newton pounds per square meter figures needed, no trawling on the internet, no special torque wrench. There's a torque setting built in here. It's not super accurate, but we've just said 6 will undo it, Therefore, let's do 7 as a kind of tightening it back up to where it was and a tiny bit more, but not so much that we crank way over into it and split the wood or any problems like that. So little sneaky ways of getting things done without getting all scientific about it. And interestingly, what you're going to see throughout this video and all my other ones, if you're crazy enough to watch them, is you're going to see me refer to a kind of common sense method every time. And I know that it will probably bring me some what's the word? Approbation from certain viewers who, you know, for some people following technical numbers and manufacturer specs and so on is really, really important. We're talking about a guitar here that will cost, when I've finished with it, at most 175 quid, probably a little bit less. What I'm showing you here is ways of doing this with common sense. That means you don't have to have all the most precise instruments. You need, you know, things like this. We worked out a safe approach to torque using one of these, that you probably already got something like that. And it's just common sense. If 6 will undo it, then 6 should do it up, and maybe 7, and you're just a bit more tightened just for confidence, but not so much you damage it. There you go. There's a rule of thumb. When it comes to setting heights, I'll show you a common sense way of working out or understanding what the height of the strings over the first fret can be to give you a certain feel of playing the guitar. Don't have to be. You can have it as high as you want. But I'm not referring to any manuals anyway, in any way, any part of this process. I'm going to use some common sense principles. Okay, so back to removing the neck. So you want to be supporting this neck so it doesn't fall on the floor, and you want to be gently pulling apart these two parts. And your main thing to do at this point is to look out for any shims that exist. And now shim is a insert, a piece of sandpaper or plastic that's inserted between the heel of the neck and the pocket itself. And I'm just going to zoom in closely to show you. Right, currently there aren't any, and if you did find, there's a bit of muck here, but it's only fluff. If you were to find a shim, you might find it positioned here. Sometimes you might find one on the wall there, or on the wall there. And a shim positioned here will basically, if you think about it, a shim will tilt the angle of the neck, right, and it will raise this part of the neck here up, so that you don't have to raise the action here so high. No, that's wrong, that's the other way around. It's so that you don't have to lower the action too far. Okay, so shims are put in there in the factory to get the geometry of the neck just right. If you see one, don't be worried. It doesn't mean your guitar's badly made. It just means the engineer in the factory has decided that it needs a shim to get the angle geometry exactly right. Hey, here comes the wizard's assistant with a branded pasty. Yeah. Hey, thank you very much. Breakfast, lunch. It's Thomas, my erstwhile assistant. I get him on part of this neck if he wants to do some work later on. Okay, so once the neck is safely off, sorry, I probably sound really loud at this point, forgive me, I'll talk quieter. Right, the neck's off. There's a bit of fluff. What is it? Is it anything to worry about? No, it's just a bit of gauze or paper or something, but it's not acting as a shim. We can see it's August 2008, confirms what we know about this guitar already. No shims positioned in there, so we've got nothing to worry about. Now, if you do find a shim in there, my recommendation is to draw a pencil line or a permanent marker line around it while it's in place, so that if it falls out, which often it will, you know exactly where to put it back in, because a shim placed where it came from will cant the neck differently from a shim placed there if you've forgotten where it should be. So mark where it is, and if it falls out, fine, you'll know where to put it back. If it moves, right now, mark around it, take it off, put a tiny bit of glue on and put it back down. There's no harm in doing that. You want it to be where it was before. You don't want to mess around with the neck geometry unless there's a very, very good reason for it. Okay, so here we have the thing in two parts. I'm going to put one part off to the side for a minute, the neck, and we're just going to carry on looking at the body, and then I'm going to stop and eat my lunch. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just have a look what needs taking care of here. Okay, so what I want to do is, I can feel there's a lot of the original plastic underneath here, so part of my little job will be to take that off. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, we're filming the standard Strat. I say we, it's sort of a royal we. How was town?
Yeah, good. We were talking to Penny in the glasses shop, and she
This is Claire.
hello, and she plays guitar.
Oh,
she
yeah.
plays in the band.
Oh,
and
yeah.
She's quite good, and she had to make up her mind to either do music or physics.
Mm-hmm.
So she's a bit of a brain box too. But she heard us talking about guitars and stuff, and she
Who was
said,
us? Who was us? She said?
Julian and me. Julian.
Okay, who?
Thomas and me talking
Yeah.
about guitars, and
As you do.
and she did know that he was learning because we talked about it before. But she takes her guitar to Manson's,
Yeah,
and
and
it costs
Exeter.
her more than £100
Yeah.
for a setup.
You see?
And she
No offence, nothing against Manson's in Exeter.
and she said he does do an excellent job.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how many guitars come out of the shop and they're not really set up.
I've just had this same conversation with these
Oh,
poor viewers. There's all this plastic from the original thing still under. No harm, but it just makes a rustling
You
noise.
don't need the extra noise.
You don't need it. Anyway, we'll take that away. Okay, so lunch break. Back with you in a second. Now, this may be a bad decision, but I've chosen to carry on doing this with a bit of radio in the background because I was just listening to any questions or whatever it is, and I'm tired of switching it off and on, and I don't think that the Google algorithm will discover that it's Jonathan Dimbleby's voice and demand I take off the content. I don't know. Anyway, so what I'm doing right now is I'm taking apart the whole bridge, and I'm going to give everything a clean. And that's a thing I always do with reloved guitars, is just check everything out, but also make everything look cleaner. So we've got a really grubby looking tremolo bass plate here, and I'm just going to give it a nice little shine up. There's no harm in doing it, and it'll just make this thing, restore it back to a nice kind of shiny finish, which why not? And the reason you can do it is if you take off the bridge saddles, then you can really make that shine up nicely, and it just makes the whole thing feel looked after and a bit newer and a bit fresher. Why not? But you can't really do it until you take the saddles off, and that's fine because all these saddles are in good nick. I'll just point this down a bit. Saddles are all in good condition. They're all pretty clean. I'll give them a quick wipe down, but there's no built-up goo on them or anything. So it's all just ready to put back together when we come to put the whole thing together. But it's a nice way of just freshening it all up a bit. And I'll show you in a second. I've done kind of the same with the scratch plate. There's no reason. I've played this guitar when I bought it. It works. There's no reason at all why it has to be checked. But I've still taken off the scratch plate, and the reason is I can just get underneath and pull out some of the grime that lives around the edge of the scratch plate. It just makes it look a little bit cleaner all round. But also, as you're going, you can check and make sure there's no oddities or things you need to know about, so it doesn't hurt. On this guitar, the wiring on the Squier standards is a little bit tighter than on many of the other Squiers, so it's actually quite hard to lift this plate off to show you what's underneath it. I can do if I just move around a bit. I'll give you a sense of what's in there. But, okay, so it's routed out for a HSH configuration, or possibly HSS or HSH or SSH, whatever. I don't know. And interestingly, this one has an earth wire that's anchored to the body of the guitar, which I haven't seen before in one of these. But it's also does go through to the tremolo claw at the back. But like I say, there's nothing about that needs taking any attention and paying to it. But I've just been able to get under the edge of the scratch plate in order to keep it nice and clean. So actually what I will do at this point is I'm going to, a bit fiddly though it is, I'm going to get all the scratch plate screws and put them back in now, since I don't need to go under there for any other reason. And they're all in good condition too, so it shows how well looked after this guitar has been. I do need to clean those volume tone knobs, and actually they're easy enough to do with a bit of soapy water or whatever, so I'll go and get some of that in a minute. So I can just go around now and put these back in. While I listen to politicians spinning the yarns on Radio 4. Again, when you're putting pickguard screws back in, be very careful with the amount of force you use. I'm doing this because it's convenient to use a power driver, but I'm also very cautious about slowing it down right before the screw tightens up. You're only holding down plastic here. You're not needing to hold two structural pieces together. It's just holding a piece of plastic still, so don't over tighten at all. All that will happen if you over tighten is you'll strip the thread, and the result will be, at some point in the future, someone like me will have to put some tape around the screw to make it stay in, or fill the hole full of no more nails and screw into that, both of which are possible. But just, it would be avoidable if you just go lightly with your screwdriver work. Okay, so there's that done. I think that's all the screws in. Oh no, one missing. And I've given the guitar body and all around the tremolo plate a good clean, so I can put this off to one side until we're ready to put it all back together again. I'm putting it on a stand. What's interesting that when I took the tremolo block out, it was you could actually see when you were looking around the back, you could actually see that it was in slightly at an angle, and I'm not sure that that's intended. So I think it's a result of the bridge posts being slightly misaligned. Now that's not a problem at all on any of these guitars, because that's why you have adjustable bridge saddles, and so they re-accommodate for any, if you like, they'll allow you to accommodate any incorrect positioning of the overall bridge piece because of the post positions in the corners. They just looked a tiny bit off centre, just as an observation. Okay, so as I said, I've got some knobs to clean up, and I'll literally take those in the house now and give them a quick go. And the only other thing I'm going to do, just while we're here, is use a bit of the solvent to get rid of the resin from the back of the sticker, because I don't want that on there. And naphtha is very good for that, usually. Not in this case, funnily enough. But it usually breaks down any solvent. Yeah, it does it eventually. But it does it better than scraping with a screwdriver or a piece of metal or anything silly. Okay, nice shiny Squier plate. Done. I'll do that to the back of the neck as well, where we took the thing off. So I'm just going to pause and go and get these cleaned up. Okay, so we are back. What are we here to do? Oh yes, we're going to do the neck. So I've got all the component parts of the guitar cleaned, including the volume tone knobs. So we are now in a good position to tackle said neck. And hello again, Morris. Hello. Nice, yeah. Gives it a nod of approval. What's the quality of this like? Hey. Good. Yeah, so we're here to take care of the neck and the place where the magic happens to transform the way the guitar plays. So the cleaning and the dismantling of the body is a sort of health check and a nice cosmetic cleanup. But this is where we put the skill and the work into. So what are we going to do? We're going to take this, I'm going to give it a quick clean. It's pretty clean anyway, it's hardly been used. Oh, sorry. Oh my god, I've just brained Morris. We're going to give it a clean over with naphtha, lighter fluid, which is always fairly, well, completely inert and harmless. And then I'm going to check to see whether this neck is flat, which it's a little bit concave. Well, it's hard to say. It's sort of flat on one side and tiny bit concave on the convex on the other. There's always a way. So it's always sort of compromise between one edge being perfectly flat and the other edge being slightly humped or concave. Here comes my other cat, Sid, hunting on the hedge. Yeah, so we can't do any of the fretwork until we're convinced that the neck is as flat as it can possibly be, and it's pretty much there. I don't think I can get a better balance between the two, although maybe I could go a smidgen. Let's do a tiniest bit. Let's assume that we're starting from it being a tiny bit convex. My thing here says counterclockwise on the Allen key. Actually, I may have the wrong size one here. No, it's the right size. It's hard to get in. So a tiny bit counterclockwise will adjust it, and it basically counterclockwise will put some relief into it. It may be a tiny bit too much, so as I said, it's very hard to get the balance between these things right. I don't know. I've got this written down, and I sometimes wonder if I've written the instruction down wrong the first time, because it seems to confuse the hell out of me every time. So counterclockwise is supposed to take the relief out of the neck, but the problem is, if there isn't any pressure on the neck, then that's quite hard to do, because it's sort of from a certain point onwards there's nothing that what I've realised is the truss rod I don't think works kind of backwards. So the idea is you can just keep going and take all of the truss rod pressure out till it's slack, and that's all of your adjustability gone. And it has made the tiniest bit of difference actually, and I'd say that's as good as it's going to get. So yeah, you go, if you want it, take all the pressure off, just take it counterclockwise until it's slack, and that's now flat. So that's ready to start, and it's not going to work very well with young Morris here in the way, so we're going to have to ditch him at some point. To do this, I'm going to need masking tape, but I seem to have managed to make the bulk of my masking tape disappear. I've got one here. I have to go to the market next weekend. Okay, so what I'm going to do, Morris will get bored of this, I'm going to sit on this stool. Now Morris, sit on the stool next to the heater. You'll like that. There, nice and warm. Okay, so we're going to protect the neck before we do anything else. So while I'm explaining a sequence of events coming up, we'll get this neck done. Okay, so to level the frets and do them justice, we're going to do it in 3 stages. We're going to first of all level it, then we're going to reshape each fret, and then we're going to polish them off back up to a nice playing surface. And the leveling, the advantage of doing this is, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, that the leveling them all gives you the ability to set your action much lower if you want to. It also, as it happens, will take away any scratch marks, any chips or any wear patterns that you've already got in your frets from heavy playing or whatever. Or sometimes people drop the guitars and the strings get banged into the frets, are quite a common thing. So fret leveling will also remove all of those imperfections on the surface of the frets, or any scratches that have remained there from a previous, I don't know, some previous work or whatever. So fret leveling will get rid of all of that. So you can see that I'd start off with the tape in its full size, and then I just basically make sure the fretboard is really well covered right up close to the frets, and then as I go along I just push all these round to the back, so I've got myself a set of rip-off tags basically. Now that's obviously not going to work. That thickness of tape is not going to work all the way along, so I'm going to get myself a cutting board and I'm going to cut some pieces of masking tape. I know if you've watched one of these videos before, please skip this. It'll be the most boring thing, but if you haven't seen it, it's quite useful to know how to do it. What I found is, I don't know what this is, 2 foot long, just over 2 feet long, perhaps 2.5 feet long. I've noticed that 4 strips of tape tend to be enough to do the whole job, and so I line them up on here, and I'm going to cut them very precisely because I want to be able to cover up the fretboard and not to stop and rip and tear off curvy bits of tape. And I want them with straight edges because I want the edges always to be able to run up to the edge of the frets very evenly and cleanly. So first thing I'm going to do then is get a straight edge ruler. My neighbours next door doing their usual shouting. Not a very sharp blade unfortunately, but so I've got my strips lined up like that. I'm going to get a straight edge. The light outside now is really, really lovely. It's a beautiful day. And I'm going to cut 2 of these strips down the middle, and it doesn't have to be exact, just approximate. So two down the middle, so in half, and then the remaining 2 I'll cut into strips, sort of thirds, which again will be just estimated, but it will be good enough for our purposes. The main thing is that the lines are as straight as we can possibly make them. Okay. And they go all over the place occasionally, but as long as they're broadly speaking are straight. Now we're into thirds, and once we've done that, it gives us a range of sizes to accommodate this changing size of the frets. Now, I forgot to clean the fretboard before I put the masking tape on. It doesn't make any difference to this job, I just need to remember to do it afterwards. And the reason I forgot probably is because it's very clean anyway, since it's a hardly used guitar. It's just been standing in someone's house. It's not got the usual tons of finger goo on it that many of these guitars have, and which sort of prompt you to clean them because they look so disgusting. This one just happens to look pretty clean to begin with, which is nice. See, I've just completely gone off. This piece of wood's been used so many times now. It has its own tracks in it, and if you're not careful, the knife goes off on its own. Still, there'll be enough on there for us to do this. Okay, so seems fiddly and drawn out, and I've lost track of it again. Fiddly and drawn out, but the important thing is you're protecting the fretboard, and the fretboard is the real heart of the guitar, the way we're considering it. So I cut this down the middle and I cut it into halves again, and that's my pile of stuff ready to go. And so what I'm going to do now is just carry on pulling off the thicker strips to begin with, and just keep on laying them onto the thing until it's all done, and eventually get to the thinner bits at the far end. In this case, when we're just doing the crossover bit here, sometimes you might feel if the tape only just touches, you might want to just put a third piece over the middle, over the join, but in this case it covers it by enough. When you're doing the fretwork, the thing that you've got to look out for all the time is if this masking tape ever lifts off for any reason, particularly when you're sanding it, and if it does, you've got to just put a new strip down to keep it flat. So you have to have the discipline to stop and cut some more tape if you have to make sure, basically, that no fretboard is exposed. Because if you do that, it will ruin a guitar like this. This is also, I found out the hard way. part of the process here was we put marker pen, permanent marker on the top of the frets, and I tend to use a big thick permanent marker that's very juicy and wet and goes onto the frets very easily. But the problem with that is that if you miss by a millimetre, it also goes onto the paper. And if it goes onto the paper, the capillary action between the paper and the wood sucks all of that marker pen onto the white, clean maple fretboard, and then you can end up with you've got no choice but to basically sand the fingerboard, which is doable, and we've got micro mesh papers that allow us to do just that and get it back up to the same sort of satin finish. But it's a real pain because it's just more time that you don't need to have to spend. So I haven't yet found a marker pen that does it adequately quickly, but doesn't run the risk of that capillary action sucking the ink onto the fretboard. And the alternative is to use a really, really thin, not very wet marker pen, in which case it takes forever to colour the tops of the frets. So it's one of those swings and roundabout things. You kind of win sometimes, you lose the other way. Last few I've been lucky enough to put the marker on without running into problems, and I'm going to try and do that again on this one. I'll turn the camera around and show you the lighting in a minute. It's such a lovely day out there. But I have to get this thing turned round and out because Christmas is coming up and I don't want hundreds of guitars in the house over Christmas. So I've got myself a stock that I've got to get through, plus a couple to do for other people. So it's a mixture of different kinds of work. It's nice to have some stock and all the rest of it. I do seem to have rather a lot hanging up indoors. And of course, what's nice about the reloved guitars is they're mainly low budget guitars. I mean, some of my favourites, in fact 2 of my favourites each cost me 30 quid. And I would happily play those at a gig if I was doing such a thing, which I might be in the new year. They're good enough. So but I'm proving in practice that this really isn't about spending millions on a guitar. You can spend very little and turn a very inexpensive guitar into an extremely good playing guitar for very little money. Just this work, basically. And of course, if you pay me to do it, I have to put a price on it, but if you were to learn to do this yourself, you would then develop the ability to turn any such budget guitar into a really, really desirable playing guitar. And it's great when people come around to my house and I pull down a £30 guitar and give them a play, and they just love it, absolutely love it straight away. And to be able to say to them, well, that's 30 quid for you. And you can see them working it out compared to the guitars they've played in their past, and they're thinking, never played one that felt as good as that, and they can surely remember guitars they've paid a lot more money for in the past. So ultimately it's really a satisfying thing to be able to do. That's what got me kind of going in it. There's nothing more tangible than being able to do this, and I think what really got me going with it was discovering, I think it's really the motivating bit was discovering that it was repeatable. It wasn't just I was able to make one guitar play nicely. It's that the series of things will make almost any guitar play really well, and that's really exciting because then you can branch out and take on lots of different types of guitar and start to really, I guess, mess up the expectations, play around with what people think are supposed to be good guitars and what aren't supposed to be good guitars. And I really like that, the fact that you can confuse or confound people's expectations a little bit, because they might be thinking only a Gibson can be this good, but then hang on, what's this? The evidence is proving otherwise. Okay, so right there I have the neck nicely protected. Oh man, the light is pretty. Hold on a sec. I'm going to take you out to meet Sid, my other cat. He doesn't come in the shed much, but look at the lighting for a start. Isn't that pretty? Sid's out there on the wall. I guess Morris might come out as well. Thomas is up there playing games with his friends. Hello, Sid. You're a grumpy old sod, aren't you? Sid came to us after being abandoned by a neighbour who moved out, and he's a bit of a cantankerous old sod, but he's got a right to be, because he lived here. He moved in, and he had to begin with. He only had to get on with our cat at the time, and then she died, and he had about 6 months to himself where he finally started to settle in, and then we had another kitten with who sort of annoyed him, obviously, because his reign of as top cat was a bit threatened, and then she went and had 5 kittens, 2 of which we've kept, so he's really, really chuffed off. Hey, Mr. Grumpy. Look at that fur, constantly molting. Just stroke him. He's a bit sort of schizophrenic, you know, he wants to be stroked and then he'll get a bit grumpy and bite you. What have we got out here? We've got sheep in this field. It's like a summer's day. You could not believe this is almost December. And we have got sheep over there, I think you might be able to see. But yeah, it's a phenomenal day. Anyway, we've got a Squier standard Strat to take care of, so let's get back in there. Morris is still here. Okay, little detour to the wilds of Devon. Okay, so we are set to go, and what we're going to do is, just for information purposes, I need to write something down. I'll keep a general record of what different guitars are like. So we had a Hagstrom and it was 70%. Let's do that yesterday, and so today we're doing a Strat standard, and we're going to measure that and see how many frets are uneven on this one. I do this part really for info. You don't need to do this, although you can do it. It's perfectly possible if you do it, if you want to find out which of your frets are level and which aren't. And to do that you'll need a square edge, flat edge, and you can use a credit card. It's certainly possible, and in fact you could cut a credit card to suit. So a credit card would do the same job, and it has to. The only thing is it has to cover 3 frets at once. So the long edge covers 3 frets all the way down to about here. In fact, it goes on quite a long way, about here. Then you could cut the next edge a bit shorter by snipping it off there. I could probably do it if I could be bothered. And then you could use a smaller edge and so on. So you could, perfectly possible to make your own. But I've got one that's made out of aluminium. And the idea is to check whether a fret is level or not. What you do is you put the long edge, or whichever edge is appropriate, over 3 frets at any one time, and then when you put it on the frets you try and rock it backwards and forwards over the middle fret. And I'm going to just zoom in a bit here so that you can really see, and here actually is most importantly. So I can't check that one or the last one because there's nothing. There's not a fret on this side. So the first one I can check is this one here. So listen. So I can tell you that pretty much all of this fret is uneven. Now the truth is it could be that these are lower and that's in the correct position, but we don't know. All we know is that relative to these two, that one's high. It could be because it's low in there or low there. So we're not saying an absolute, we're saying relative. And then we move to the next one. And that's got the edge is clicking. So I'm just going to mark up there and there. And so I just keep on going all the way up this guitar neck. And that one is pretty much all the way just inside the edges. And so you can see that I'm able to write onto the masking tape what I find. And actually, if it's really bad, I can make the line thicker or whatever code works for me, just to tell me what's what. So I'm now at the point where I probably need to change to the shorter edge, slightly shorter edge. And I found just a spot on there which is uneven. I just keep going. And that one is most of the way across, and it's fairly hefty. Hey, one that's even. Amazing. Ouch. 90% of the way across that one. Getting heavier at the end. And one that's even. And another one that's even. Ta-da! Okay, so you can see that there's quite a few already. And it's usually, it's just a mixture of feel and hearing that tells you. And you can sort of start and you get a feel of where it starts and stops. You can just mark it up. Just a little blob on that one. Hooray, clear one. Now I'm ready to switch to the shortest edge. The neighbour next door laughs like a witch. She's not, she's quite nice, but he's cultivated this demonic laugh. So this is probably more than the 60% that I predicted. In fact, it's probably more like 70. Right, nearly there. Strangely hard to do when you get to the very close together ones, actually. Because there's a much smaller distance to do any rocking, so it's quite hard. Okay, so we've got, I think this is 21 frets, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, sorry, 22 frets. Take off those 2, makes it an easy calculation. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There you go, exactly, 75% for this beauty. So it's pretty bog standard, I have to say. That is the state of play of a quality Squier made by Fender guitar, which I still say all its component parts are really good quality, perfectly good enough to make into a guitar that you want to keep and modify. But amazingly, 75% of its frets are uneven, and that hasn't happened over time. I promise you that is exactly how it came out of the shop, or the factory and the shop. Right? Nobody else to blame but the manufacturer. And so let's just remind you that those uneven frets together mean that you have to raise your action up to overcome them. So if I were to get a piece of string, extreme way of demonstrating it, but especially when it won't come undone, and now I'm just going to waste my time trying to get it down. Actually, it might be better. Anyway, so I guess you're looking at, there's your action of your strings, and because the frets are uneven, you're forced to raise the action to overcome the uneven frets. right? And so you can't go any lower than that, let's say. No, it's not truly that, but now taking care of that allows us then to lower the action much more at this end and also at this end as well. I'll keep this because it's useful for demonstrating another thing in a minute. But anyway, so here we go. We're getting ready to begin the process of fret leveling, and as I said, 3 stages. First stage, level the frets. Second stage, reprofile them so that they're the right shape again and not flat on top with horrible loads of scratch marks. And then third stage is to polish them all off to get rid of all scratch marks and make them shiny smooth, so that you'd don't know what that is. Shiny smooth, so that you would like to you can bend your strings and play them. So this is so nice out there. I think you should get a look at the outside world and all its loveliness at the same time as what's going on down here. Probably going to get dazzled. Let's do something with that. Something like that, probably. Yeah, that's not a bad balance. Okay, so my first stage here is I'm going to put some glasses on to help me see detail a bit better. Milk bottle bottoms. Now this is where I'm going to draw across with this pen across the top of all of these frets. And I want it complete cover with the permanent marker, and I've just got to do it lightly enough to get a cover, but to avoid squishing down and letting the ink go down the size of the paper for the reasons I mentioned before, which will cause me much grief. And another way to avoid that is not to ride over the ends too, because it will also sneak in over the ends if you do it. I think I just touched the edge there. One of those kind of moments. So just worth taking time here if you're going to do this way. Now, having marked this all up, the reason I marked it is because I'm going to use the pen as a way of telling where I have and haven't worked with the file. And so it's now a simple case of we get the neck in position, we get the file, and to level it, we're sure that the neck is level. We've done that with the truss rod. And now what I'm going to do is run the file down the neck, slightly tip towards the edge first, and stop, down the neck, and stop. And then move in a little bit, and then move towards the middle. And we see we're doing it in stripes effectively. When it starts to jump like that, we don't really want that. So trying to do it without having it chatter isn't always easy. Maybe lighten up the pressure if it's chattering. But basically we're doing a whole series of nice smooth stripes, and I don't know if you can see from there, but it's cut up the tops of the frets quite nicely, and you can also see very clearly a lot of swarf or metal bits that have come off. Now what you'll see straight away, you can't probably see it on that camera, but from where I'm standing, the first thing you notice, the ones that you marked as being very high suddenly look like they've been cut quite considerably compared to all the others, and some of them where they weren't high are probably leaving, they still see some black marker pen because there may even be slightly low spots. But it kind of confirms the ones you saw were high were in fact high. And so what you're looking to do is, once you've been over it once, you just check it over, and you can see some untouched spots. Now to get this right, we need to touch every fret with this, and so if there is a low spot, like I'm suspecting, in fact I'll mark it up with a different pen. I suspect this here could be a low spot. By the way, there's no harm in keeping track of things and coding things so you know what's what. If writing on the masking tape helps you do it, as long as it doesn't go through and mess up the thingy, which I hadn't really thought about. Yeah, so I can see that I think that's a low fret there. But what it means is, to get this to work right, I've got to go down with everything until I get down to the level of that trough. And that's where you have to be a little bit kind of courageous, because if you see a low trough, there's no point finishing this off now and going ahead leaving a dip there, because it will always act as a a trough, and they will always get problems on the next fret there. So as long as we've got enough overall metal in the frets, we need to have the courage, I suppose, to keep on going. So this time I'm starting at the other end, and I'm going to come back this way to make sure everything gets an even pressure and not start on the nut. Now this should take care of all the frets that maybe didn't quite get touched at this starter end, and hopefully we'll also get down into that level of that trough, and that we'll now have all the frets to some extent cut with the file, and I'm now looking for the bit that I said was low, and it's almost touched, and I will go once more in this direction now on all of them just to make sure we've got everything done. And this is a very light touch now, slightly tipped on the edge, and then coming in as we close up to this, come closer to the centre. So what we're doing is, because we're doing it in stripes, we're effectively mimicking the profile of the fret, or of the neck I should say. Okay, now looking all the way down, I can tell you that every single fret has been hit by the file, actually possibly bar that one there, and if I just want to make absolutely sure, I might just run a couple of stripes down this end, bearing in mind I don't really want to concentrate on one spot any more than any others. So for me that's good enough. So I'm done with that stage. I'll put that file off to one side. What I want, God, the lighting is so pretty. I want never gets. A couple of things. I seem to have lost my phone, that's the first thing, and I want the brush, which I've lost, and now I have my wasp friend come back in. Okay, so there's my phone, which is telling me it's 3:30, and I have covered up the brush. Actually, I've got a couple of things you can use. A paintbrush. So I'm just going to get rid of all these little shavings, or whatever you call it, and now I can see that I've got a, it's not very easy to see in this light now, I've got all frets have been cut, and what it leaves us with is the marks of this file, which are very, very rough. So even when we've done the next couple of, or the next stage, we're still going to always have to remove, when we come to polish, we're going to have to be removing the marks left by that tool, which is pretty harsh. So we've got quite a challenging job to do with the when it comes to polishing. Okay, so that's the first bit. Now next step, we go straight back onto the frets again with the marker pen, and we go onto the flat tops, the flat rough tops of the frets with the same marker pen. Again, doing everything we can to avoid letting it go down the side of the paper, because it's going to want to mess up that fingerboard really badly. So again, this serves as a sort of guide, this permanent marker, and this time we use it differently. It's not just going to show us where we've cut, well it is, but it's a slightly different way. We're going to use a tool that reshapes the frets so that they become rounded again instead of these flat topped things, and in this job the marker pen is going to tell us where we've cut away in the similar sort of way, but this time we're going to aim, when we reshape these frets, we're going to aim to leave a strip of black marker pen on top of the fret. And if we're able to both reshape it and leave some material on the fret, what it's going to do is going to tell us that we've reshaped the fret but we haven't lowered any. So the presence of a thin strip of this untouched marker pen tells us we haven't taken anything off the top, and if we haven't taken anything off the top, we haven't lowered it, because now our objective is to retain this this evenness that we've gone to such lengths to get, but we still need to reshape. So I'm going to use this concave diamond file, fret recrowning file. It's quite simple, that I put it onto this squared off flattened fret, and as I move it backwards and forwards, it takes the sharp shoulder of the fret away first, and it gives me two little kind of shiny skid lines as it's taking away that shoulder. And I keep doing it, and it's reshaping the fret, but at the same time I can see it's leaving me a little strip or a few bits of that marker pen on the top. Now it doesn't do it perfectly, but once I can see that there's only a bit of marker pen left on the top, I'm going to stop and move on to the next fret. And this is really critical you get this right, because if you lower the fret any further at this stage, you've sort of basically undone all the good work you just did when you did the fret levelling. So you've got to really pay attention to this part of it. This way we're reshaping or reprofiling the fret, so it's no longer a squared off, flattened thing. We've regained a nice hump shape, but we've left the very top untouched. And if we can get all of these done in that way, then we know we're onto a winner, because then we need to just polish them all the same, and we will have a nice polished set of frets, all nicely and evenly levelled in relation to each other. And that was the objective we set out with. Okay, so I'm going to stop for a minute and come back when that's miraculously done. Okay, back again. Let's get on. Just a little break there to get hold of somebody who's selling a guitar and confirm. I can see a nice cream-coloured Squier, Korean Squier Strat tomorrow. Right, now here we go, the next stage of the game, and it's once we get this done, we're on track. We've done the bulk of the hard stuff. We're going to need a few things. We're going to need a pair of glasses for close-up. We're going to need some sort of magnifying glass for even more closer upper. And we're going to need some 240 grit paper. We're going to need some 800 grit paper, a rubber block, and some micro mesh papers, which go from 1500 grit up to 12,000. And it's a very simple deal we're into here. We start with the scratches made by this and this combined, although those are much worse than that. We've got to use those to get rid of both those scratches. Then once we've done that, we've got to use those to get rid of those scratches, and then when we've done that, we've got to use those to get rid of those scratches and polish the thing up. So that is the regime. But it's incredibly difficult to do. You've got to pay really close attention to get rid of those initial scratches. And so it just takes, it's not that hard to do, it's not rocket science, but it takes a bit of discipline and focus, because you have to be convinced before you move on to the next grade of papers that we've got rid of the marks made by the previous one. So to begin with, I'm going to use my fingers only, and I'm going to start with quite abrasive 240 paper, and I'm going to just allow my fingers to press into the frets, because what we don't want to do is get increase the flatness of the surface. We've reprofiled it using the fret crowning tool, and now we're going to allow our fingers to ride up and over the frets to continue sort of enhancing or accentuating the curvedness of those frets, because we want them as nice smooth curves. Okay, so starting off by using my fingers to do that, and because the finger pads are very soft and they're very good for kind of keeping this smooth and rounded. So all the way, the emphasis is on giving the frets the same amount, roughly the same amount of treatment all the way across the whole of the neck. So we don't want to concentrate on any one spot, because yes, you've guessed it, if we did that, we would be creating a new, potentially creating a new uneven spot, which would be kind of defeating the whole object of what we've just done. Now, sometimes I give the end of the neck a little bit more attention than the rest of it, because it just so works out that the middle of the neck gets the best work done on it. it's always hard to get the pressure starting just as you begin the run. So it's always the middle that gets the better treatment and gets smoothed out first, or gets the scratches removed first, and the either end tends to follow a bit later. And so you can feel all the abrasives coming off off the paper as you're doing this, and you can expect to do, I would say, at least 2 passes or 2 sheets of paper until it runs, until it wears out the paper, and to keep going. So there's one piece run out. I'm going to brush off the dust onto the floor at that point because it starts to build up. I'm not even going to get into a close-up check. I'm going to go straight on with the second piece of paper at this point. And also, as I'm doing this, I'm keeping a very close eye to make sure that I'm nowhere is the paper lifting. Remember, because I must not start damaging or must not scratch the fingerboard at this point. Having done all this work, we do not want to damage the fingerboard. So 240 is quite abrasive, and if you just stayed on one spot doing it, you would absolutely wear that spot down. I use 240 to level single frets, so it's more than capable of leveling a fret, and as we're using it right now, it is definitely taking off material. But the secret is to take it all off at a consistent level, consistent rate. So we're making sure all frets are getting the same treatment, so that whatever it's taking off all of them together. Okay, so having done 2 pieces, it's not a bad time to stop and have a look. Sometimes there is a kind of useful thing you can do at this point. You can get a piece of very fine paper, like 1500, just a little strip, and run it counter to the direction or the axis, across the axis you've just done. Just lightly run it across all these frets, and that really helps, in my experience, to show up the original scratches made by the leveling file. So if there are any there, you get to see it much easier this way, because you've just done this stripe that runs counter to the direction of scratching we've just been doing, if you get what I mean. So at risk of looking like Hercule Poirot, I'm now going to literally examine every single fret, and that if I see a mark that and it's a bit of experience, but you'll recognise when you come across, it's like a little pock mark that tells you still haven't quite got down to removing the marks made by the first one, and I can tell there's one there. Okay, so I know, according to my rule, my discipline of getting this done right, I know for a fact that means I'm going to do the whole lot and continue to do the whole lot with the same grade. I don't move on until I'm convinced I've got none at all. And again, I've got one there, I can see. So this is absolutely required, and if you haven't got the discipline or the patience to do this, you just don't begin it, because the danger is with this is if you don't give this the time and the respect it deserves, you will end up polishing up what looks like a nice set of frets, but the minute you come and bend a string against the surface of the fret, it'll scratch. You can feel the gritty, scratchy thing, and it stands out a mile. Even if it was, a couple of microns deep, that scratch will spoil your playing. And it's a little bit like how if you've got a tiny blemish or imperfection on the neck where your left hand, if you're left-handed, if you're right-handed generally, but where your left hand forms the chords and goes up and down the neck, if you have the tiniest imperfection in the neck, you'll find that just sort of sticks out a mile in terms of it's all you can feel. Right, and so that's one of the other things I do, is to check all the guitars and make sure there's no sort of dents or little blemishes on the neck. that the fingers can pick up, because of course we've got incredibly sensitive fingers and touch, and it's one of the things that can make a real difference. So that's why I take the time. Now there's a couple left on here. So that tells me that's fine, absolutely fine. It tells me I'm going to do at least another one with the 240, and it just tells me where to keep an eye on to make sure I cover. Now what I might do at this point is I might switch to using this sharpened or shaped piece of foam, and it's just rounded, and it kind of takes over from my tired fingers. And I kind of should say that it goes probably better further in than my fingers could do. Again, as long as we're giving, I'm sorry, it's distorting. I didn't mean to do that. So long as we're giving, you know, all of the frets a kind of similar amount of attention, it's fine. We're taking it down at the same rate. And also it means I can actually kind of rotate the paper quite easily as well. And if I want to get into the frets, I can run it against the grain, if you like. Okay, yeah, so tomorrow I'm going to go and probably buy a Korean Squier Strat. Thing is, I'm a sucker for cream coloured Strats anyway. I'm discovering, and this one is a Korean one, and it looks pretty nice, and the guy says it has some fender parts on it and has been set up really well, la 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 la. So either which way, it's not a huge price at all, and it's local, and I'm sort of passing through that way on the way to band practice tomorrow, so why not call in, make a detour and possibly buy it. Okay, so just looking back to where we had the marks, they're now clear. Yep, okay, I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to switch now to the next grade of paper, which is the 800, and I'm going to straight away just go to the block. There's no reason why not now, and I don't need to spend too long on this. I'm just replacing all the 240 scratches with 800 scratches. And because it's a bit less aggressive, we can be a bit less worried about it, reducing the frets too fast or being uneven. And it's always good if you have a particular technique, then switch it round and go at it the other way. Vary the stroke that you're using, as it were. Okay, might use another one. I'm going to do another one by hand now, just to finish this off. And I think the thing to remember here is that this is where the feel of your guitar is made at this point here, and you know, you'll notice that this is taking, I mean, I've cut some of the video as well, but this is taking at least an hour and a half to do all of this, and we aren't finished yet. So it's not that I'm doing it particularly slowly, or there's some extremely fiddly particular technique I'm using. What I'm doing is I'm aiming to have leveled the frets so that we can regain control of how high or low we want the action. Well, really, it's give us options on going lower. We've removed any damage to the frets in the process and given them a new lease of life. And now we're in the process of making sure it's as level and as smooth as it could possibly be, and going through the process. And of course, you know, seeing how long this takes, you know, as soon as I started doing this a few times, you know, I really had plenty of time to think about how come, well, no, not how come, if it took me an hour and a half to do this and to do it well, then I could start to really understand why it wasn't done in the factory. Just a little note here, we're going from 800 there to 1500. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on this one because it's quite a jump. So, yeah, you know, an hour and a half of hard work, careful hard work. Yeah, no wonder it's not done in the factory. I don't know what exact the economics are. I don't know how much labour rates are. I'm sure they're not that much in China or where Indonesia, in fact, where this is made. But, you know, it's an hour and a half, or if you're going to do it really well, an hour and a half. If you're going to rush it, maybe an hour. But that's an hour of somebody's time. And presumably that would, if they could do it there, that would have a cost associated with it. And it's clear that somebody is deciding that cost won't be borne by the buying market in Western democracies like us, or somebody's decided that it's so unnoticeable a difference, or so small a difference, that it's not worth losing that little bit of profitability to do it. And I guess I'll leave you to figure out which of those you think it is. All I can say is that, you know, if it was just one guitar in 100 that was really badly made, you could say, oh well, you know, it's not such a bad deal. Maybe, you know, maybe on on average they're pretty good, and it's just, you know, it's just a few, and actually we can't afford the cost to make sure 100% of them are right. But it's not that; it's 100% aren't right. That's the funny part. So it's all of them aren't right, and as a result, someone like me can come along and put the time into it and show you. Well, if I could get you to play two of these side by side, one that's just bought straight from the shop or picked up second hand, and the one that I've done this to, you'll have absolutely no problem at all telling the difference between the two, and you wouldn't go for the one that hadn't been done. Or even a silly thing, even if you did all Squier standard Stratocasters this way, then you'd sell more of those than you sell Epiphone SG specials, because these would all have that feel to them, that they were fantastically low action, beautiful, easy to play. And why would you buy a clunky old SG with horrible action and uneven fretboard? So for some reason somebody's missing something, and you know, I really don't know the answer. Could it, and I'm not just saying that for effect, because I've thought about it from every angle. You know, the cost angle. Well, you know, even if it cost you an hour of an Indonesian worker's time, surely if that gave you an advantage, that would be worth doing. You know, and then you have to say to yourself, am I alone in noticing the difference between this and a guitar that hasn't had this done? And clearly I'm not, because I'm selling every guitar I do. So there is a market for it, and people are paying twice for a guitar that I work on than they might pay if they just sat on Facebook, eBay, and looked for one themselves that hasn't been done. So it's not only me that notices it, it's clearly a bunch of guitarists out there like me who it matters to. And yet the manufacturer isn't doing it. So it's either the manufacturer doesn't possibly know that it makes a difference, or that will give them a competitive edge for a certain amount of investment in people, you know, doing this bit of the work, or they don't know it and they're just ignorant and they're just shoving things out as fast as they can, or the profit margins are so small that it doesn't make any, that it doesn't make it feasible to do it, or maybe there's a really cynical way that says, yes, they know it makes a difference. Yes, it's affordable. Yes, it would cost them a little bit of the profits they make. Yes, it might give them a competitive advantage. And yes, people still buy enough of their guitars without them doing it. Maybe that's the cynical bit. Maybe it's the customer hasn't stopped buying these guitars in the shoddy state that they're sent out in. And maybe that's the real secret here, is that why should I change the way I manufacture these if I am Fender out in Indonesia? Because am I struggling to sell them? No. Do I really care that people have to, if they really want quality, they have to spend another 70 quid to get someone like me to do it? No. They've still bought my guitar from my factory. I'm still shipping them out to the retailers out in Europe. So maybe it just comes down in the end to the fact that we get what we will put up with. And maybe the answer to the secret of all of this, or the good thing about all of this, is, you know, there are clearly people who want better than that, and guess what? I find them and sell to them. And if you're watching this, you're probably one of them. Maybe that's how it should be. You know, maybe I shouldn't be surprised. I guess the bit that doesn't, that I like about all of this is, yes, I can do this and make a little bit of money doing it, but the bit that I really like is that it really does hammer home that point that actually there is probably no reason to buy a custom shop, or there's probably no really good reason. If you're into playing guitar and enjoy playing music, then there isn't a real strong argument to spend £2,500 on a Gibson. But as my brother said on the phone the other day, he said, it's not a £2,500 Gibson, it's a £2,500 plus £150 for a luthier setup Gibson, and that's probably also true. And maybe just that's the way the world likes it. Okay, enough chatter. Here we are with our beautifully shined up frets in lovely condition, nice shiny levelled frets, ready for anything we want to do with it. And so now the fun part comes, where I can just reverse the process. Thankfully my little tabs that I thought about in advance make this process a little bit easier. The neck will have got dirty throughout this process, there's no doubt about it, so I'll be prepared, as I will now anyway, to give it a thorough clean. And we'll also do the fingerboard as well with some of our lighter fluid. But we're now in the exciting place where everything from here on is getting the guitar back together, setting it up, and making it really feel the difference now, because basically we've given ourselves the headroom to do it with this fret leveling. And as I said right at the beginning, I can't see any real reason why or any point in trying to do a setup for a customer without doing this part. Now, if the customer says, I've only got 30 quid to spend, will you set it up without doing fret leveling? I would say, not really, unless there's something obviously I can improve just by changing the setup. But the truth is, most guitars that you will get will have been set up by the owner as good as they can get it. Sometimes they botch it up completely because they don't know what they're doing. That's fine. But most of the time they will have set the action as low as the underlying frets or condition of the fingerboard, if you like, or the fretboard or the neck will allow. So there's not a lot you will be able to do on most guitars in terms of setup. So I really don't like the idea of taking somebody's money and practically achieving nothing. I would much rather turn them away and then take a little bit more money later on and give them something that they can immediately tell the difference with. You know, that just feels like value for money. Something that's hardly changed doesn't feel like value for money. And I have a feeling that's what's behind this, I don't know if you can see from there, that's what's behind this amazing Schecter Sinister thingamajig guitar that I've got here to do for a customer of a customer, if you like. And that's what's basically happened, is that something about the guitar they want improving, and they've taken it to another guitar bod down the road, 50 or 60 miles away actually, and I don't know the story behind it, but it seems that this person hasn't achieved what they wanted, and so it's now with me, which is kind of flattering and pleasing, but also, you know, it brings with it its own challenge. What is it that they want that this other person hasn't done? Now, I have to say, I'm confident in the sense that a lot of the time I've seen that happen, it is because the person who they've taken it to actually doesn't do the simpler things that I do, including the fret leveling, for example. And without doing that, then naturally they won't be able to improve the playing action much. And then, you know, whatever they do, the person gets the guitar back with the same, pretty much the same string action or playing action they had before. Even though the luthier says, "Well, I've wire-wooled your frets; they're shinier. I've cleaned up your this, that, the other, or polished your whatsits." But the player will say, "Well, it feels the same, mate. I wanted you to make it play faster or make the action lower." And of course, if the guitar tech or the luthier or whatever you want to call them isn't doing a fret level, there's no way they're going to improve the action on based around what they've got in front of them. So I'm kind of interested, and I haven't got a clear brief just yet on that, but I'm hoping to get that later on today. Right, so as evening falls, I suspect we're going to run out of either battery or video space in a minute. But while we're at it, let's just plough straight on. We're in a nice position now. All's good in this place. I'm not taking any of the tuners off. They're good nick. There's nothing obviously wrong with them. I will, as we go through, make sure they're done up properly. But we've now got a lovely shiny neck with beautiful leveled shiny frets ready to go. And so the time comes to bring back up our friend the body and prepare to put these two things together. Now, I've found through experience, you would think that putting the neck into the body is an easy business, turning it over, doing the bolts up, everything. What could be simpler than that? Well, it isn't simple, and what can go wrong is, believe it or not, the neck you can think you've got it into the pocket, and it can be a millimetre out of place. And it can sort of stick a millimetre out of place and then not go on, and you end up you end up with a guitar neck that's sort of locked in place, out of position, and that really isn't any good. But if you're not thinking about it before you do it, if you sort of assume that it's just going to go back in where it came from, that's when you're going to hit trouble, because you just mustn't assume that. So with that non-assumption in mind, I can hold it together and I can sort of look around it and I can feel to myself, does that look like it did before? I might have even taken a reference picture. Now it does, I know it is, and I'm going to just turn it over now, still holding it. So it's a combination of holding it with pressure and maybe, for example, supporting it with a block or two without bending it out of shape. So just taking the weight a bit off the neck, and I'm now lining it up where I want it. I know it's where it should be. I'm just going to put the plate on, and I'm going to drop in the screws all round. Now remember this business I said in the first place about the torque on the screws. Take it all slowly. We said a torque of 7 on my screwdriver. If 6 was just enough to undo it, then let's have 7 to do it up. Okay, above, here we are. Heading for the finish with the Squier Strat Standard. Now, we're now in a good position to move onwards to replace the tremolo block and the various bits and pieces which have come out. I'm going to tip out here noisily. What I'll do is I'll just put some of the things out of the way. So the tremolo block to go in, it's very easy. And some knobs to put back on, also easy, and the 2 posts, which are also easy, and they can just be put in by hand and wounded to the correct, well, actually wound all the way in for the time being. And we'll use a Allen key if necessary, when necessary, to raise it back out if we want to change the action. Okay, so we have, so let's not do that just yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put together the thing. Now all of these little thingies are the same. I've lost my words for a minute, I'll get them back. the little bridge saddles are the same, so there isn't any particular way we need to put them in. I'm just going to be cautious of not getting this any dirtier than I have to, because in putting this together it's a little bit fiddly. It's easy enough. You put the screw through the back, spring on top, fat end first, well, if there are any, which they're all the same on this, and then press the screw into the back of the block. Now I'm going to use this, I'll find the right one again. I'm going to use a screwdriver bit to do it. It just speeds the whole thing up a little bit. Make sure I got the right one. That'll do. Place it with one hand. Okay, and I'm just going to put it on far enough to hold it in place to begin with. I don't want to overdo it or drag it all the way back. And again, I've made a bit of a fingerprint there, so I'm going to just clean that off. It would be such a shame, having cleaned it up, to put it back together again with any fingerprints in the way, which will just attract more grime. So I'm doing a little bit of, I suppose you might call it white glove assembly here. I don't know why I just made that up, but you know how they do in some factories, I suppose. And then push it into place. Now I know, generally speaking, these blocks are the bridge saddles. Effectively describe three little triplets of stepped back in relation to each other when you put them on. So I'm setting them that way just to begin with. Will give us an approximate intonation. So the first triplet go into a shape that looks like, let me just get this clean, a shape that looks a bit like that, and then the second triplet will start there and take a step back as well. So you can pre-set it that way if you know, if you've done it enough times, and you know that's pretty much where they end up falling when the intonation is set properly. So this is just probably the only fiddly bit for the time being, and I say it's probably more fiddly because I'm trying to keep it clean, having taken it apart mainly to clean it. And on this part, if you do use an electric screwdriver like I'm doing, just make sure that, because as you're doing this without being able to position it by hand exactly, you've just got to be very careful you don't cross thread the thing, the bolt thing that you're putting in here. It'd be a bit too easy to do. As it's now, it makes its first bite, it's quite easy to cross thread it. So if you get even the slightest hint that it's not going on smoothly, stop and pull out, as it were. Okay, so I'm going to get all of them in, and then I'll put the bridge piece, the whole bridge, back. Can't get the screwdriver into the slot. Okay, cleaned off, as shiny as it can be to go back in here. The video ran out just as I was getting the what's the word I'm looking for? The video ran out. Why can't I get this in there? Don't make it hard for me. Video ran out as I was what was I doing? As I was doing the neck back up. That's what I was doing. And I was just saying that as long as you've got your torque set the way we agreed to set it, then you won't have any problem. Now, this is being a little bit annoying. It's not quite out. Alright, are you going in? Yes, it's in. Hooray. So, come back. So I just had to wiggle the post around a little bit to get the bridge to sit in its correct position. And it has to sit down with the little cutouts resting in the waist of your little poles, which is kind of where it is now. And flip it over, hold it in place, and the way to hold it in place is just to put it under pressure, and we then want to put on our springs. Now I have left, interestingly, I've left the tremolo arm for this guitar in London, so I won't be able to. I can check the tremolo roughly once we've restrung it, but if it needs adjustment, I won't necessarily be able to adjust it until next week anyway. So, but it's not going anywhere. Even if somebody buys it this week, it's not going anywhere. I'm just going to try and get these springs back into the block to hold it all firmly together in the position it will be in when we close the patient up and put the back on, which is comme ça, way spinny, like that. And what it does show me, actually it doesn't show me there, it shows me here. If you were to look at it flat on, you might be able to just tell that that whole tremolo piece is slightly tilted. But as I said earlier on, that's not a problem. That's what the bridge saddles are there for. They are adjustable to allow you to accommodate little variations of positioning like that, which is just as well, because if you didn't have any adjustment room, or if guitars didn't come with adjustable bridges, it basically puts the pressure on you to be hugely more accurate in terms of where you place the bridge. And so when building a guitar, as I've made a little oak one in the house, I chose to have a bridge that was adjustable, so that if I was slightly inaccurate in where I positioned the bridge itself, I was able to make some adjustments using the saddle. By winding the bridge itself forward and backwards. Okay, so it varies. I don't think there's any particular one place where people start their tone volume knobs, so I'm going to start with my 1s facing me and then the 10s facing away, because I guess I don't have to get consistent with this because I haven't really worked out which way to do it every time, but if I'm going to do that, then it's the same every time. I think that's a good place because it's facing the guitarist. Okay, so they're all in place. All that crappy rustling plastic that got in the way is out of the way, and now I'm starting from, it's pointing at the screw on the screw on the pickup, and it's pointing 1 to the screw, and then it's 10, it's 10, it's 10. That looks good to me. Okay, so just want to make sure that the space between the pickups now is nice and clean, because I'm going to put the strings on now, and we've got restricted access to do any dusting and cleaning after that, including on this tremolo plate here. So I want that to be as good condition as it can be before I complicate things by putting the strings on. Right, done. Let's get on with the stringing. So, set of 9s as per usual. We're going to need our string winder, and we're also going to use, is this still working by the way? Yeah. String winder and wire cutters we'll have here, and we'll start with the bass E. Now with these Strats, you've got to be a little careful when stringing. There's a couple of ways you can get caught out. The first one is, if you don't pull the string all the way up into the block, it can get caught halfway up, and then it can end up seeming like it's doing up, and then it can leap forward with a bang when it really does up a bit later on, and that will put a crimp into the string, which you really don't want. The other thing I'm doing here, or I thought I was doing, is if you keep the tension on this, you won't let the string end fall down again. If it does fall down while you're messing around up here, then you could still end up getting that, get it locked in place until you put the tension on, then it will jump forward again. So put the string through. I'm going to, how am I going to do this? I'm going to pull back by, or pull up by about an inch, I'm still keeping it under tension for the back there, and this isn't really going to work. I'm trying to keep it under tension and give myself some slack to wind on. Maybe I'll just do it like that. That's probably the best way. And then get the string winder into operation. We don't want much in the way of turns, many turns on these bass strings. We don't want too little, or else it won't grip. But if we don't have, that may be actually too little, I hate to say. I've slightly done this differently from how I normally do it. I'm just going to slack this off while I still have the chance. I'm going to put a tiny bit more on here. It needs about 1.5 complete winds to give it a good solid grip. There are other techniques, and again I still haven't learned it. There's another technique you can learn which allows you to sort of thread a string back on itself and sort of loop it over, and to be honest I keep doing this and forgetting to learn it in advance of doing it. So anyway, once I'm on, I'm going to cut all but about 1 inch off, so I can see it. It's not going to catch me out. I'm sick and tired of being stung by the string bee, or the string wasp as I called it the other day. It's bloody painful down that end. So let's just set first string on. It's good to do this, it's easier to do this with the back plate off. You can see straight through the block and make sure it's going on properly. And rule of thumb is, in case if you ever get confused, the string has to be wrapped round the centerline side of the tuner, so not the outside of the tuner. So if you find yourself turning the thing and the string's going round to the outside of edge of the guitar, the fresh air edge, you're winding it the wrong way. So you need to make sure the string stays on this side, the centerline side. That's one way of describing it, I suppose. Okay. So what we're going to do with this is just put use all these strings, put them all on, and put the guitar under load. We're not worried right now just yet about action or tuning exactly. We're going to tune it up only close as we can get quickly, just to put it under the correct loading. And once we put it under the correct loading, then we get to have a look at what the neck's doing and to see whether we need to make any adjustments to that before we start working on the action. Okay, so I'm doing this with a bit of slack on each of these strings to give it enough room to wind on, but not too much. Now this is the first string that's going to go under the string tree. So you need to be conscious that it's correctly up in the block there, that it's going through the correct slot on the nut, and that it's lined up to go through the string tree as well. And I tend to press down to make sure these strings don't automatically wind onto the top part of the post, because I don't really want them coming out straight line. I'd like them to have a bit of upward motion as they come towards the nut, if you see what I mean, on the headstock side of the nut anyway. Okay, so these are the strings, the metal the unwound string, that is even more important that these don't get crimped unnecessarily. So at all times I'm now trying to make sure this doesn't get crimped or drop back down into that block. Okay, so now I've got myself good enough slack to turn. It's probably more than 1 inch on this one, because I'm doing this slightly different from how I normally do it. But this one has got to go under the second string tree, which aren't the best design of string trees, I have to say. I think a small modification you might want to make on a guitar like this, which actually I might look into, seeing how much they cost to buy a few in more of a bulk buy, but a nice improvement on a guitar like this would be roller string trees instead of these little metal crimped ones, kind of bent ones, because these aren't very smooth for the string to go under. and it's, although I've got some graphite powder which is very good for lubricating the nut slots, you can't really make it stick to the underside of a string tree very well. It usually just falls off. So you've got that sort of slightly sticky point in your, you know, the train of where your string goes, which you could do without, since everything else is working really nicely and you've taken the time to make it work really well. So small upgrade if you can find them, or if you can get them second hand. There's nothing you can really go wrong with them. Get yourself some roller string trees. Same applies as well, by the way, if you're ever in the market to improve your bridge, always go for a roller bridge of some kind if you can get one for the model guitar, because the same thing applies. It's really putting a string. This isn't so bad, this is quite a smooth thing, but on the weakest bridge design probably of all is the Les Paul style, what do you call them, you know, tune-o-matic bridge, which has the strings going over a really sharp edge into the playing area, and that's just kind of asking for trouble, really, asking for breakages and all manner of crimpings and damagings. So I think it's kind of commonly held view amongst many guitarists and techs that the tune-o-matic bridge is a monstrosity. But you know, they stick to it. But I've got a Les Paul copy, a vintage Les Paul copy in the house, which I changed out because it didn't come with the correct bridge anyway. It was a good opportunity to change it out for a roller bridge. I've done that on a couple of other guitars. Okay, so right off we have our strings gone on, and I'm going to just now randomly crank up the tension a bit. I'll do some stretching as I go. It's actually incredibly low action as it stands, and but it isn't to say that that's going to be the action at all. We're just going through the motions at the moment. Oh, what are we doing? Way too far. Okay, so that's going to be straight out of tune because the strings are going to slack off quite a bit still. So, but it's great. Put it under a bit of pressure and then we tune again, and it will just take a lot of the slack out before we get into working on the action. Okay, so we're not worrying about the action right now. The settings here are all over the place, and we don't even know if the guitar has enough relief in the neck or anything yet. So we're just at the very start point. The first thing we're just doing is putting the guitar under pressure from the strings. The neck is now under tension, and that's going to start to give us a realistic look at what's happening and what we need to do. Okay, so what are we going to do with this? What's the secret? Well, the secret is we put the neck under pressure, under tension from its strings, in this case a set of 9s, which are quite, I guess you don't have to put them under so much tension to get them to make the same notes. So you can hear that this is not right. of it anyway. Not playable as is because we're grinding out. And anyway, you wouldn't want it like this. This is a ridiculously low action, even if it played, which it won't. But remember, it's our start point. So first thing we're going to have a look at is what's happening with the neck in terms of the pressure, or the relief in the neck. So I'm just going to get a quick eyeball down the neck, which you can't see very well me doing, but there's quite a lot of bend in that neck. So it's what we'd expect, because we set it right back slack to 0. It's probably too much bend for the time being. So I think the first thing we're going to do is we're going to dial out some of the relief. Okay, just move everything out of the way so we don't get any knocks or damage. So to dial the relief out, to do that, we need to turn the truss rod clockwise. You don't get a lot of space when you put the strings on, but I can get a little turn out of it. And what we can do is that's going to fight against the pull of the strings, and it's going to flatten it out a little bit. It's not going to be too much, and also we also know that at this point in time that the action down here is way too low anyway. So I'm going to switch to close-up glasses as next stage, having taken a bit of the relief out of the neck, and I don't know exactly how much yet. I'm now going to pay visual attention to the bridge saddle down here, and I'm going to start dialing that in to give myself to lift it up a bit, and I'm watching basically down here. What's the action down here? And I don't want to go much beyond a centimetre and a half, a millimetre and a half high, because that would be a sort of nice playable action on a Strat like this. So I'm just going to hoik it up till it's around about 1.5 millimetres, which it is there, and I'm going to stop. So my first test, I suppose, is does it play notes? Which it does. Does it bend without choking? Yes, it does. So that's a good start point. Now what I need to then do, minding out that I don't knock this guitar in any which way, I'm now going to visually dial the other strings up to a shape, if you like, that follows the relief of the neck. So I can see, and this is purely visual, but it's enough to go on. I'm looking down and I'm making the shape of the saddles recreate the radius the radius of the neck. Okay, and so I'm just eyeballing it basically. And once I've got that, then I'm going to have a look and see how each string does. Now that's approximately the radius. It's not going to be precise. You could get a gauge from a store of some kind and do it. Okay, so we've got quite a high action, or a workable action here, 1.5 millimeters. We're testing the other strings. Does everything play? Yep, everything does. So right now we've got an okay action, right? And it's a lot better than it came with, but for my liking, it's okay. And I'm now going to go back to have a look at the relief in the neck, and that actually, those turns have probably, believe it or not, straightened it out almost a fraction. I'm just going to try to get the light in the right place. A fraction too much. So that little crank on the neck, on the truss rod, has levelled, flattened the neck out a tiny bit too much. So we know that counterclockwise is going to give us back a little curve, and it's just how small that turn was. So I'm now going to do about 1/32 of a turn to just give myself a bit more bend back in, and that's going to make the notes ring a bit truer. Now, what I can tell you straight away from this, and this is the real problem with this guitar, I measured it beforehand, and I think I know it was the other one. The Hagstrom that I did yesterday, I measured the string action as 0.7 at the first fret, and I'm going to measure this one now, and I have a feeling this is even worse. It's probably over 1 millimetre. Now, it doesn't sound like much to you or me, but what I've discovered, having done this enough times now, is that down here on the nut, you are looking for an ideal on a guitar of this kind with perhaps a little bit higher than actually on a guitar like this, given that if you're aiming for about a 1.5 millimetre action here, you're looking for an action over the first fret of about 0.25 of a millimetre, or at best or at most 0.3, and this I have a feeling is about 1 millimetre, which is basically 3 to maybe 4 times too high, which is quite something actually. So I'm going to try and give myself a start with a 1, because that's my guess. I'm going to pull out 0.5, 0.2 and 0.3 to give me a 1. Right, and it's kind of hard to do. Ooh, I keep crunching this little thin one. It's quite hard to do multiples because there is a bit of air gap between them and they don't always sit together perfectly, but it should be sort of enough to give us a test, or give us a view. But as it stands right now, I would say this is humongously over gapped at the first fret. And the way we know it, it's hard to do because this is really not playing games, not playing ball. But you put it under there, and is there room to press down? I think there is almost. The note's ringing, so that means it is exactly, or just a fraction over 1 millimetre high. Now that will create, you can play it, but that will create intonation problems. So when you're fretting those notes there, you have to press so hard to make the note touch the fret that it is already sharp of the note you're aiming for. So if that's tuned perfectly to an E, open string, and then you press your finger down to make it connect, it should be an F, but because of the force you have to use to get it that low to that fret, because it's too high here, you end up with that fret, that note being slightly sharp, or quite a bit sharp of F. And that's why that when a guitar has the nut slots not deep enough and the action is too high over the first fret, what you'll get is you can tune all the notes absolutely perfectly as open strings, and you will get a combination of whenever you play open chords, they will sound slightly off to the ear, and you'll never quite know why it is, and you'll keep wanting to retune things. And that is only because the action is too high, and it is, in this case, it is probably 4 times higher than it should be, which is an enormous amount. So just to recap, lowering it will correct the intonation so that it won't go sharp when you play notes down here, either chords or single notes, and probably more importantly from your perspective as somebody who's buying this guitar, you will notice it as an incredibly easy to play action. Right now, for a beginner or for anyone, that's quite a tiring action to fret these strings. It's not the end of the world, but it's still quite tiring. By the time I finish with the setting here, this will just you just hardly have to touch it to fret bar chords or any chords down here, and that's the real payoff for this. So I'm just again going to check, make sure that the relief I've asked for back in my neck is there, and it is. So I'm going to stop with that. I'm going to stay at 1.5 millimeters at this end, and I'm going to move straight on to working on the slots down at this end to get this part of the guitar right. So the first thing I'm going to do is to pull out the 0.3 I'm going to aim for. I'm not going to go lower. Some guitars will do 0.25 depending on the mood I'm in. I'm going to support this neck under the pickups there because I'm going to use a little bit of pressure on that end. not pickups, tuners. Sorry, sometimes I end up talking so much on these videos I just say crap. You can give me a thumbs down for that one if you want. Seriously, I got a couple of thumbs down over the few weeks ago, and I just I can never quite work out what people give thumbs downs for. Maybe they just hate the look of you or something. I hate that person, I just hate them, I hate what they're saying. They're arrogant, they're stupid, they're... Anyway. But then again, you have people who sort of, they look at a Beatles video or something, or a great Legend of Rock's video, and they give it a thumbs down because they hate that musician or whatever. Right, so to do this job I'm going to work with some simple tools. What you'll see there is I've got my feeler gauge set on 0.3, which I'm going to work across the first fret, and I've got a set of nut files which I bought at a high expense, but you know, that's the way it is. There are cheaper options, which you can buy some little I don't know, what's the word, welding nozzle cleaner file things, and they do work. Sometimes it can take quite a long time, especially when you get down to the thin ones. They're really bendy and it's almost impossible to put any pressure on. But I found that with the gauge of strings, I bought these to suit the 0.9 set, the only ball super slinky 0.9s. I found in fact that the 0.9 is actually too small for the 0.9 string, so I end up having to ditch that one for this process, and I use the 11 as my first 16 and give myself a little bit of space, and then for the last one, which is now currently missing, I use a combination of that file plus the largest one on here, sometimes a combination of the two things as I go through. Anyway, the point about this is I'm going to now go and cut these slots to the right height. If I get it wrong, I just get another nut and put it on, or I can use, because it's a white nut, you can use the magical get out of jail free card, which is the bicarbonate and soda fix, and if you cut down too far, you can take the string off or out, and you can put a blob of fill the gap with bicarbonate of soda and then blob some runny super glue just on top of it. You don't want it all over your fingerboard, but that will then set into a kind of paste that you can file and drill and or whatever you want to do. So you can use it to get out of jail, and it does work. But I'm going to take this so slowly that I don't anticipate, I haven't had to use that for a long time because I take it slowly. And what you'll see happen is I'm going to do this one first, that one, first three, then I'm going to put some graphite in all those, put them back in, and then I'm going to remove all three of the treble side and work from the G to the B to the A, and then put some graphite in those slots and then put them all in and go into the tuning up process. Here comes Morris again. Now I remember at the come on Morris, you go down by radiator. I'll put it on for you, look, it'll get nice and warm. Here you are. I said at the beginning, none of this I'm using sort of factory measurements. Now how do you know, if you hadn't got access to internet, or you couldn't find out the specifications for a Squier Stratocaster, how did I work out for my satisfaction what the gap here was supposed to be? I'll tell you what I did, is it was how I worked out what was going wrong with most guitars in the first place, is on a guitar that I kept having these intonation problems and that was really hard to play, I, like many people, assumed that the manufacturer's settings here were right. I didn't know any different. So what I did is I noticed on this guitar that I couldn't live with, I noticed that every time I put the capo on, it played really nicely and I could really live with the guitar. And as soon as I took the capo off, it couldn't get it in tune, it seemed, and it was really hard to play. And of course eventually, I worked out that all that was happening is that when you put the capo on, it makes this fret here into your nut, a kind of 0 fret nut. But then I measured, not with any, I didn't even have a feeler gauge, I just measured with a, like a business card or something, what the gap was once I put the capo on, and I noticed the gap on the new first fret was vastly smaller than the open strings first fret, and I'm thinking, well, how come when I put the capo on and reduce that gap, everything plays lovely and there's no problems, and I don't have the guitar's not choking or buzzing the strings, but when I take it off, I'm gone back to high action and it's really hard to play. And it just made me realise that that is what the action should be. The height of the strings over this first fret when you capo it, and I use the first fret as a 0 fret basically. That's more like the working action that you should have on your guitar. And the logic for me was, if, well, okay, maybe that's not what the manufacturer says, but how bad would it be if I make that action correct? If I make the action here with the capo on, the action here without the capo on, how bad would that be? Well, it would be A, easier to play like it is with the capo on, and B, it would sound just as nice as with the capo on, and C, it would be in tune and there wouldn't be any intonation problems because I wasn't fighting to get the strings onto the frets. So it was that point I realised that all I had to do was to just work out or measure somehow, even without feeler gauges, measure what that height of the string was. And what I realised is, even though I didn't have a device for measuring, let's say I got the business card and I put the capo on, let's say the capo's on, and I'm got the business card which is a fixed width, because I didn't have anything to measure this gap, I just moved along until the card was exactly fitting, and I said to myself, okay, when this is right, on the second fret it will be just about exactly the width of my business card. So what do? You take the capo off and you go, right, when I've got this down to the right height, on the second fret it's going to be exactly the width of my business card. And it doesn't matter what that width is, I just know that it's got to be that width on the second fret. And that was the logic I used. And then I could cut away at that nut until it was just about starting to grip the business card, and I'd say, right, that's done. That is now mimicking the corrective effect. Now the truth is, and that's why guitars in the 50s and 60s used to have a 0 fret, because that is the best way of setting the correct action over the first fret, is to use a 0 fret, which in a guitar like this would be, the nut would be back here and the 0 fret would be there, and the real strength of the 0 fret is that it would set the correct height over the next fret, the first fret. And manufacturers don't do it, and this is the biggest, this little thing here that I've spent quite a bit of time telling you about, is probably the biggest culprit in why guitars don't play well, and nobody deals with it. The manufacturers, well, actually that's a lie. I've just seen that Gibson, for £2,500, is now starting to deal with it. So that Gibson has now patented an adjustable adjustable nut, which you can put in and then you can take down or up to change that height there. So for £2,500 on the new Gibson, you can have that facility. The rest of us, it's doing this job. But if you've never seen or heard of this job being done before on your guitar, you've been fighting your guitar all these years. Okay, and if you buy this guitar, you'll notice the difference. And then when you go back to playing another guitar after it, you'll be really struggling. Okay, so I do have a device for measuring. I do know that I want 0.3, and I do know that right now it's about 0.7, too much over that 0.3. So here we go. First one, slack off. I'm going to start with my combination of this fat one here and this thing here, and I'm going to take my life in my hands and I'm going to start cutting this slot down, and I'm tilting slightly backwards at all times because I want the string to rise up towards the front of the nut. And I'm just going to use this one here to just widen the slot a little bit so it's a comfortable fit for the string, and just being cautious where the end is, because sometimes you can go too far and damage finish or whatever. So a little bit of cutting, drop it back in, tune it up. Not exactly, you just tune it up to rough approximately, check the gap again, way higher, slack it off, back in, and that's all we're doing. It's going to go on for quite some time, and you're going to get bored. The nut that the material they make these Fender nuts out of is a bit spongy and it's quite hard to cut, and so it will take a long time. And you'll need less pressure when you get to the thinner ones, and you have to be conscious and cautious that you don't just go at it with the same amount of gusto as when you're doing the cutting these thicker ones. But the moral, or the kind of watchword here, is a little at a time, and get there in the end rather than cut it too fast and end up having to replace the nut. Or fill it with baking powder. So again, this will take some time, and I'll probably do 8 or 10 attempts at reducing this using this file and that other device there. And I can see it's producing some white powder when I do it, so it is cutting slowly. It doesn't have to be exactly tuned, remember. But I can see the gap now is getting smaller, and the shadow, or the shadow is coming closer. And we just bit at a time, patience, and we'll get there. And when we get there, we'll stop, and that will be that one done, and we'll move to the next one. Now, I'm going to use, I've sort of developed the technique of using this thingy, feeler gauge all the way through. But you don't, if you get good at it, you don't even have to do that. You can actually gauge it by where the shadow falls if you've got good lighting, and your eyes are incredibly sensitive, and they can see the gaps judging shadows. But you know, to be on the safe side, stick with a feeler gauge. We're nearly there with this one. You'll know that it's at the height because you'll just start to buzz when you put your feeler gauge under there and twang the string. We're not far off this. This is quite soft plastic as well, so it doesn't feel like you're making progress. Bone works. Bone's more, it gives you more feedback about what you're doing. But again, see, I've got the feeler gauge under there and it's still ringing true, so no matter what it looks like, we're not there yet. But yeah, bone is a more brittle, usually a more kind of brittle substance, and it can respond. It feels a bit easier to judge how it's cutting. Whereas this plastic kind of can, for a while, you can feel like you're achieving nothing. Right, we're nearly there with this one. Like I said, I'm aiming for a 0.3 gap, whereas in the past, some guitars I've gone as low as 0.25. 0.25 sometimes can feel almost supernaturally low. By the way, I'm just shaving off the sort of leftover sticky out bit at the back so it's tidy. Yeah, 0.25 can feel just almost too low, so you don't want to shock people. Again, plenty of room still because I can still hear that note ringing out. So we go in, do a bit more. Always take away a bit more. The subject of the nut height, or the slot heights on these things, it really infuriates me sometimes when you're first into guitars and you get into the mysterious world of listening to guitar techs and luthiers talk, or you see them commenting in forums. Often you'll hear people talk about, for example, I'll give you one, I don't know if it's still current, but a few years ago when I was younger, it was that people used to insist that the correct way for the strings to sit in a nut was that they had to be just half out of the nut and half in, so that the slot in the nut must not be more than half the diameter, half the, you know what I mean, the one radius of the string, for God's sakes, and because it looked nice, right? Now that's fine, but if you're thinking about it practically, and you've got a nut that's been glued in there by somebody at a factory, and it's got some kind of half cup shaped slots in it, then you plop all your strings in there and it looks just like they tell you in the forums, and everyone who thinks they're an expert tells you it should look like. But the problem is, you've got no idea how high over the first fret it is. You know it looks nice, and everyone said that's the way it should be. But the truth is, it's maybe way over the height that it should be, and you've got all kinds of intonation problems. So what's the point of having a thing that looks like somebody said it should look? And the argument, by the way, behind that was that if it's half out, then it won't be gripped by the plastic, and therefore it's not likely to bind, and therefore you won't get sticky tuning. Right, fine, okay. There's a sort of bit of a prima donna-ish kind of argument for that, but I might say, well, cut the slot the right size and put some graphite in there and it won't stick anyway. But that aside, so what you'd end up with was a thing that looks good, but is miles too high or inaccurate over the first fret. So to preserve the good looking bit, if that's your priority, and it seemed to be in the days when I caught those discussions, you'd then have to take the entire nut out, and if you were going to reduce it, you'd have to shave it down from behind, put it back in, tune it all up, measure the gap again, take the nut out, shave it, blah, blah, blah. All because somebody said it has to look that way. And of course, once it becomes established, accepted wisdom that it has to look that way, you get absolutely flamed and insulted for doing it any other way. And that's a real sad thing, because often people start doing things without thinking about, you know, the case for doing them, or you know, the reasons behind it. So, you know, my position on the height of the strings over the first fret has come as a result of having an insoluble problem with intonation on a guitar I paid plenty of money for that should never have had that problem. And since then, having worked out how to put that right, I've now seen that it's borne out that many people, including I've fixed every guitar that I've had through the workshop by paying attention to this, and a number of people have come to me specifically because they couldn't live with the guitars they had for the exact same reason, but they didn't know how to name it. So, you know, you can. It's funny that people can do things a certain way, and then you change how you're doing it, and people can get really upset about it. But I'm the kind of person who does something only if there's a good reason, and the reason makes sense, which is why I do the things I do the way that I do them. And if I do something a certain way, there's one of two reasons. Either it's because I'm ignorant and I haven't thought about it, or if I have thought about it, it's because there's a good reason. But I'm not immune from being ignorant and not thinking about it enough either. So there's some things I did without thinking. Okay, that's just starting to buzz. So for me, that is the right height. And immediately I can tell the difference between the first and second strings here. Massive difference. So I'm going to take this off because I want access under here with my thingy gauge, and now I'm going to stick with the same file because I'm going to use that one for this one as well. And now I'm just going to go in and work away now at this second string, the A slot. And again, same process. I know it's very high. I'm going to do it cut at a time. And I'm going to come back, come in, measure it. Now what is true at this point, first of all, this string isn't as way out as the other one. What's also true though is with the load off that E string, the neck geometry has changed slightly. Right, so we have to bear in mind that. It's not so much that it's going to make much difference to this process here, but it helps to be conscious about what things change, or how things change. And to be aware that if it is changing in a way that's going to be significant, then you've got to take that into account one way or another. And as I say, in this case, it's not going to make so much of a difference to the action over the first fret. It will make, practically, physically, a tiny difference. But it'll be pretty close. And also, I'm working on tolerance here, which has got enough built in for it being slightly out. If you were really worried about that, then I would suggest that you put your E string back in at this point, retune it up to tension, and visually set the next string without trying to slip. Without trying to slip the feeler gauge underneath both, or you push it under both, it's whichever. Right, we're nearly there with this one. So you can see that the D string hasn't taken as long to get close to the mark. I said that each string has a different, each slot has a different kind of different characteristic, and you've got to be conscious. If you kind of go at it asleep thinking they're all just going to be the same, you'll get caught out because they're not. And as you can see, this I will be much quicker on this A string. and I suspect quicker as we go through as well. Still a bit of play, just the notes ringing out clearly still, so we know we've got a little bit further to go. Okay, that will do me. So in this case I'm just going to put that off to the side as well, and we do the D string, which again, looking at this now, is almost there. So I'm going to switch now my first change out of the files. I'm going to go to the 32, doesn't really matter what it is, just out of sequence basically, and I can tell you that's close before we even start, so I'm going to be very cautious on this one, and I don't want to overcut this one. Yep, we'll be at the right height pretty quickly there. Hey, what's up?
Just broken on my stick.
Which one?
The one that everything goes on.
Oh, gold.
It's trying to shave down those.
Yeah, the knuckles.
Yeah. Just makes them a bit weak.
What's going to happen? Close. What's the alternative? Carbon fibre.
Is to find some dowling that's a bit more rigid. So you'd think that would do it, wouldn't you?
Hang on. Okay, there, we're done. Let's have a look. Yeah, well, it would do, but it's gonna always go like that. I mean, it doesn't have to bend much from vertical to look bendy, does it? Have you got no more bamboo? Okay, so that's on hold. The first one worked, so it can work again, right? That's the bright side.
The trouble is that I shaped all the holes to go over those knuckles. And then when that broke, they didn't go over the next lot. So I started sanding down the knuckles, and we got all the way to the last one. Can you believe it? Got to the last one, and it just spent an hour doing that.
Yes. And I was annoyed enough last night for you, let alone today.
It's alright, it's a design fault, clearly.
Okay, so we've got to work out how to get around that.
Right, I'm going to finish a tree and make myself feel better.
Good luck. Oh, Morris wants to go out. Hold on. Come on, Morris. Out you go. Go on. Go on. Good boy. Right, so we've done the first three and just blown out the sort of leftover. Now, straight away, completely different feel to this guitar now. Very much easier to fret. Fret the notes, and now we can just whiz through on the others. Again, to do this I'm going to take all three of these off in one go, off to one side, and we're going to work outwards to the edge, and then once we've got them all done, I'm going to do a bit of graphite in each of the slots and we'll be away. Again, it's got to come to right to the edge, so you have to make the G a bit loose. Okay, actually what I'd need to do, and I'm going to just go back here and tune the G up and just see how far we have to go on this G, because it's probably not very far at all. Okay, so we're shifting to a different file, and we're going to just check it. Okay, now I can see visually it's a little bit to go, but it's not a huge amount, so I'm going to be very, very careful. And it's probably going to be in these 3 treble strings that you will make a mistake if you do, or I will. Because it's so easy to go overcut these, as I've found out in the past. So this is, if you're going to sort of switch into an even more cautious mode or gear, it's here you want to do it. So you think to yourself, look how long this is taking, and look how much attention and concentration you have to get this right if you're going to make this guitar play the way it should. And those of you who are interested in having this done or buying this guitar, I know, make no mistake, I do this because I know you're interested in having that much quality and precision in the thing that you play. But there is no really fast way around this. Still a tiny bit. Yeah, there's no shortcut, unfortunately, and it is, you've got to put this amount of work into it. The interesting thing is that all those years that I didn't do this, almost there, all the years I had a guitar and didn't do this, the reason why is because I didn't know the difference it would make. Of course, there wasn't YouTube in those days when I were a lad, so I didn't have anyone to sort of hear talking about it and go away, and that's the problem I've got. And in a way now we're lucky that we do. So we can, one of my customers came to me by just hearing me talk about this problem that we're doing right now, and having heard me talk about it, he knew exactly that was the problem he was currently having with his guitar. We're so close there, might just stop. Okay, yeah, so that's very close. I'm going to give it the tiniest tweak, but I think we're almost there with these. Just by chance, they happen to be cut right. There's no reason why they shouldn't be, in the sense that it's just chance, if anything. But just because the bass strings were way out for my liking, doesn't mean that also all the rest will be. I'm going to stop there too. It feels quite good to me. Final one. Get it back under its string tree before we get it in there. And of course the beauty of doing this is that, you get this right, you've got a guitar that you can live with, and you don't need to change out in pursuit of something that plays better. In fact, what you could do with this guitar, if you wanted to make it better, you could experiment with going, save your money and whatever birthday present to yourself, and have a really, really great set of pickups installed. Because that will be pretty much all that makes the difference on this guitar. After this will be the pickups you choose to put on it, and that is always an option for upgrading and investment. And I'm going to get round to treating myself one of these days. To something really nice. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I think I feel the force is telling me that everything about that is right. So, just a quick recap. Hello again. It's me. You see, we've been doing an hour on this last segment already, so look how long this takes to get right. Okay, there's no skimping on time and quality in this, and this is what the cost is for. Okay. What an action, baby, what an action. Just under 1.5 millimeters at the 20 something fret. Now what's interesting about this is we've done that without, at the moment, without any attention paid to the tremolo, and that's partly because I don't have the tremolo arm to do it with. So this is treating this as a bit of a fixed or a, yeah, not exactly a, what's the word? It's not a floating tremolo at the moment. And what you probably want, what I would probably want to do is raise this up a little bit, in which case I would lower the action on these bridge saddles a bit. And I'm going to really need to do that next weekend when I've got the tremolo arm itself back, which I'll do from work. Now what that will do is it will kind of raise the whole tremolo bridge up slightly. I'll drop the bridge, the individual bridge settings down here a bit, to regain the 1.5 millimeter action, but it will it'll end up with giving us the proper range of movement, and the strings will have settled in by that time. And then I will, I'm just thinking about this, I will intonate that afterwards. Will I? No, it's the same. Let me just quickly think. Actually, I shouldn't. No, I can do that now. One might argue that we would intonate after we'd finished that final action. Ow! But actually, it's going to be close enough to do it now. So what we need for this job, we'll get very close, and I suspect it will be close enough. So we need for this the amp, the tuner. You don't really need to see the amp, do you? Not exactly, but you're probably worth hearing it. But as long as you can see the tuner, sorry, in the picture, the tuner ran out of power that time. Okay, so we're set up to do the intonation, and you can, what can you see? Well, let's see, hope you can see most of it. Now for this, I'm going to need a screwdriver with a fairly fine bit on the end of it, to hand, and my tuner and the amp. Okay, so the whole point of intonation is to make sure we've got the exact length of string for the neck we have on this guitar once it's all in place, and we do that by making adjustments by moving these little bridge saddles backwards and forwards, because the screw allows us to push them back or forwards. Now, how do we know whether we've got the right length of string? And first of all, the question as to why each string has to have a different length is to do with its material and width and mass and so on and so on, but they do. And so what we need to do is to use our tuner and tune the first string to exactly in tune when we're pinging a harmonic on the 12th fret. That'll do. If it's the correct string length, then that note will be exactly the same as the fretted note at the 12th fret. you can see it's flat, and that means the string is too long. We're going to tighten it up by turning this counterclockwise, which shortens the string somewhat, and it will also slacken it off, so we'll need to retune it to start the process again. Still flat. I'm going to crank it out some more. And hopefully we won't run out of space, because if we do, then we've got a problem with the intonation. Interesting. It's about right, actually, which is lucky because we weren't going to have much intonation space left. So I'm going to just quickly adjust all of these into a sort of roughly approximate pattern that I know should be roughly right. Save me having to do too much when I get round to each string. And then we'll go on to the next one, and so on and so on. Come on. Okay, something like that. Right. Right, of course. Got that right. And that one is a fair bit off still. Flat, so I'm going to come forward with it. Hit the wrong strings, doesn't help. Interesting, that one still wants to come forward, which doesn't conform to the pattern that I expect. How strange. Pull that forward a bit more. That is really weird. It's not doing what I'd expect. quiet. Keep going until it says it's right, but that's the weirdest pattern. It's very weird. I'm trusting what the tuner says. I wonder if the other tuner is going to tell me anything different. iStrobosoft, which I haven't been very keen to use. Never ask me again. See, that seems to me unreliable. Well flat. So crank it out. Here it comes forward. Somewhere in between. I'll stop there. Tiny bit out. Good. This is the bit I don't like. It struggles to hear this note for some reason. Squier, so I don't like how weakly it seems to register it. Didn't used to until they upgraded this bloody software. Typical, isn't it? See, that's become unstable as a tuner, and I completely recommended this tuner once upon a time. In fact, it was recommended to me by Justin Sandico. And they've done something to it, which I really can't tell you. Right. I don't know what they've done. Got some settings, tuning auto manual, sense, frequency, who knows, input boost on, noise filter off, filter updating, noise filter on. Let's see if that has any better chance. No, it's still not behaving itself. So I'm now switching to the free one, I think it was. It would hardly cost anywhere near the same as the other one. And we know that the bass notes always do wander. So it's still saying it's low, so not very happy with this tuner arrangement. I'm going to have to investigate something else. See if this will prove what it's performing like now. Now it's right. So now let's go the other way now. See what happens.